Hello and welcome back to the channel, everybody. I am your host, Vortex, from MobileMusicPro.com, your home for mobile music production. And if you are new to the channel, what we do here is release weekly videos teaching people how to produce music on their iOS device. And in today's video, we're going to be showing you the basics of how to create your very first Synthwave song inside Cubasis 3 right after this. And remember folks, if you do enjoy this content, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. Now for those that aren't yet familiar with the genre of synthwave, otherwise known as synthpop or retrowave, it really is a relatively new genre that just popped up in the mid to late 2000s. Now this genre is actually focused on music that was associated with video games and movies of the 1980s, such as action movies, science fiction movies, and horror movies. And so the sound design actually comes from these types of films and video games rather than the pop songs or any of the songs that were in the top Billboard charts in that same era. Some actually credit the success of the 2002 video game Grand Theft Auto Vice City as being able to shift attitudes towards the 1980s and really start to help provide the incentive necessary to create and popularize the synthwave genre. But then later on in the 2010s, movies such as Drive and Tron Legacy started adopting the genre as well and started to popularize it even more. And then finally in 2020, a synthwave song called Blinding Lights by The Weeknd topped the US charts, the first song to do so during the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, do make sure that you stick around to the end of the video to find out how you can enter our brand new sample pack contest using only our brand new Synthwave sample pack. Alright, and now with that intro aside, let's go ahead and hop inside Cubasis 3 and start exploring this synthwave track. Alright, the first thing we're going to do here is take a listen to the track, and then we're going to break it down for you section by section, such as the chords, drums, melody, and so forth. The main thing that I want to stress about this genre though is that it is trying to focus on sounds from the 80s when these synthesizers were just becoming a thing. So that means that this genre will be focused on analog sounds coming from synths and drum machines. And since we don't actually have access to any of the physical gear from that era, we will just be using VSTs and software emulations of that same gear instead. Alright, now let's go ahead and take a listen to this song. Now unfortunately, I wasn't quite able to finish this entire song before we needed to get the video shot, but I definitely think that I have enough here to capture the vibe that we're going for. Alright, so let's just put on our headphones here and take a listen. Alright, very cool. So our current project has about 27 tracks or so. There are a couple that are currently frozen, and in addition to that, it is set to 100 BPM. Now between 100 and 120 BPM is the typical BPM for synthwave genres. So if you are producing in this genre, definitely make sure to keep your BPM low around that number. And currently the project is coming in around 2 minutes long. Okay, first up, we're going to be talking about the drums. And our drums currently are made up of a kick, clap, snare, hats 1 and hats 2, a toms track, a crash, another tom fill, and finally the drum bus. And all of these drums, including the kick all the way through to the crash, is coming from our brand new Synthwave sample pack. However, there is a fill in here that is coming from a different sample pack. Now, when it comes to the pattern for Synthwave songs, it usually is just a standard 4 on the floor pattern, which is pretty much that familiar pattern of kick, hat, snare, hat, kick. But in addition to that hat, we also have a second hat as well that gives the beat a little bit more of a groove. So without the toms and before that additional hat, we have our standard 4 on the floor pattern, which sounds just like this. But now let's listen to it with the additional hat track, and you can see how it gives the beat some additional movement. And you can also hear an open hat in there as well, which I just kept inside of the hat's 2 track for now. And I really didn't do anything different for the chorus, it's just having all the tracks playing at once. But generally when it does come to synthwave tracks, you do want to gradually build up your drums, starting out with just some very simple elements and then adding more and more in as we go. Now as far as processing goes on these drums, there really isn't anything too complex. On our kick here we just have a channel strip, studio EQ, and a FAC transient to really get that kick to drive through the mix. And for the clap, just a channel strip and studio EQ, and same goes for the snare, the hats, and the hats too. Now for the toms, there is an additional effect on here called pan and tremolo. This is a native effect built inside of Cubasis 3, and we are using the preset of slow attack. And that's just to give some more movement to the toms to make sure that you hear them coming in from the right to the left. And then we have our crash, just a channel strip and studio EQ, and then our fill, which has the same things except for that additional pan and tremolo plugin. And then finally on our actual drum bus, we just have a compressor. And that's sort of just to keep all the dynamics in check there, making sure that one drum element isn't too much louder than the next. And as we said, that is Cubasis' native compressor, and we are using the preset of Tight Mix Bus. And all we did with this preset is adjust the attack and release just a little bit, ever so slightly, and increase the output by just a couple dB. So once you do have your drums nice and tight, it does make for easier mixing and mastering later. Now the main reason that we didn't have to do too much additional processing to these drums is because again, the drums are all coming from our pack. And the drums inside of that pack have already been meticulously processed by us, ready to go so that they already sound like the 80s sounds right out of the box. Where normally, for example, you would want to do some additional processing on your snare and your snare reverb to apply that classic 80s gating sound. But again, that's already been processed for you and ready to go inside of the snares inside of our pack. And as far as mixing goes, this isn't really a requirement, but this is just good practice for all of your mixes. And that is to make sure that you do pan your sounds, both your drum sounds and your melody sounds, so that you can more easily fill up the entire stereo spectrum. And the track overall sounds more full. So you can see here we have our clap pan to the right a little bit, our snare panned to the left, our first hat track panned to the left, and our second hat track panned to the right, with our kick drum, toms, and crash sitting right in the center. And then just one final thing to note here about the drums, and that has to do with arrangement. You can see that we dropped the hats out about a half a bar to a bar early before the end of this 8-bar measure. And that is so that we can leave some room for our tom fill down here. And we've done this throughout the track, as you can see right here and right here as well. We even dropped out the second hats track as well. And this is just to let the listener know that this particular measure or this bar is about to end and we're about to start something new. Now the bass lines in synthwave songs are often pretty simple. In fact, most of them just use repeating 8th or 16th notes. And our song is no different. So if we pull up the MIDI pattern here, we can take a look. And as you can see, we do have 2 16th notes here that are coming in pairs and appear every other 8th note. So using a bit of an offbeat pattern here. And this goes all the way through the measure here, which includes all 4 bars. So a pretty simple pattern there. Now in synthwave songs, the sound of the bass is usually pretty powerful because it is the element that drives the song forward most of the time. So you do want to use some type of synth bass that is coming from one of the synths of the classic 80s era. Now in our case, we chose the Tal U synth on iOS, which emulates the Juno and a couple of other classic synths, to really drive home that 80s style sound. Now here you can see that I did double up the bass notes, using a slightly different sound for each synth. And the reason why I did that is because I do want the bass to sound pretty big and I want it to fill out a pretty big spectrum of the low end. So I added a second bass here. So let's go ahead and listen to the first bass by itself, and then we'll listen to the second, and then both together. Alright, pretty good, but a little thin. So now let's listen to the second bass line. Now that is definitely going to cover a bit more of our low end, and in fact it is using a pretty awesome new effect called Beef. And Beef is essentially the sausage fattener equivalent for iOS. And you can see we have that effect placed right here at the very end. And we're not using it heavily, just a little bit. In fact, I think we're only dialed in about 35-45%. So now let's hear both of these bass sounds together. Alright, there you go. So when you combine both of these sounds, you get a much more meatier bass. And again, for processing, just some basic stuff on here, the channel strip and studio EQ. And for bass too, we pretty much ended up using the same processing here with that additional plugin that we mentioned earlier called Beef. So again, a very simple but effective bassline pattern. We pretty much did use it throughout the entire song, only dropping out one of the bass notes here as you can see in that pre-chorus. And now let's talk about these chords. So the chords inside of synthwave songs are usually very lush and very dreamy. The idea is to capture a very dream-like feeling, so many times the chords can end up sounding very cinematic. Now as far as the key, usually synthwave songs are found in either A minor or B flat major. And in fact, a lot of synthwave songs use sus and seventh chords just to give it a little bit of extra dream-like feeling. So first up we have our pad track here, and that is not using the full chords as the rest of our chord tracks are, because I didn't want it to be too powerful, as I do want these to kind of live sort of in the background. So you can see for the chords here, we're just using 2 notes in our chords. Very, very simple, just our 1 notes here, and then doubled an octave above. Now pretty much every single synthwave song will have some type of pad track in the background, and that again is to create that atmosphere, to create that dreamy-like feeling. So let's listen to our pad here real quick, which is using the Ravencroft piano, with the Mona Lisa preset and a bunch of reverb on it. So like we said, we're just using 2-note chords there, but for the breakdown for the pre-chorus, we went back to just using actual 1 notes, so we're not using chords here at all, just regular notes. And that's to make sure that our breakdown or our pre-chorus is a little bit quieter, so that it can build to be louder and louder as we get into the chorus. And of course, no synthwave track would be really complete without an arpeggio. And we have ours playing the exact same notes as the rest of the chords here, as you can see. And we are using the Synthmaster 1 instrument for that, with just a few basic effects on here, such as our channel strip and studio EQ. But then we also added a Bleece sidekick so we can get that pumping feeling, using the sidechain effect that this app does so well. We also threw a pan and tremolo on there to make sure that the sound is going back and forth between the left and right channels. Again, trying to create a really dreamy feeling, and that works really well for this arpeggio. And finally, we added a wider plugin to kind of bring that all the way out to the far ends of the spectrum, so that all of our main instruments can kind of live right in the center, and this arpeggio can sit on the periphery. Alright, now let's take a quick listen to this arpeggio track to hear what it sounds like. Alright, very 80s sounding and sort of that dreamy feeling as well. And now on to our actual chords. As you can see, we have a few different chord tracks here in addition to our arpeggio and pad track. And layering your sounds is definitely a good idea. You'll find that I always do recommend that on the channel, because that will make your sounds sound a bit more unique and fill up more of the stereo spectrum. So the first chord track here is using the native synthesizer built into Cubasis, and we are using the distortion pad preset. The second chords track is a little bit more of an arpeggio, and is using the Synthmaster 1 plugin with the BRA-VCO brass preset. And this is basically more of a stab than an arpeggio. And finally, we have our third chord track here, which is going to be using the Waverly XL synthesizer and using the XL Square Seesaw preset. Now, I did make sure that all 3 of these chord tracks do have movement. The first one is using a filter to go up and down. The second one is using a MIDI effect, an arpeggio effect. And the third track is also using the MIDI effect from Rosetta, all to make sure that these tracks do have enough movement so that they can still sound nice and dreamy. And what's also helping to give this track some movement is that Bleece Sidekick plugin, giving a bit of that sidechain effect. So now let's hear these one by one. Now the second chord track is using a Woot plugin to give it a bit more drive and a bit of extra character and flavor. So let's hear that. And finally, let's take a listen to the third chord track here. So the 3 sounds definitely sound pretty good individually, but what makes the sound special is layering all 3 together. So let's hear that now. So when you combine all three sounds together, you definitely get that airy, dreamy-like feeling. And the final thing that I want to mention here about the chords is that they usually are filtered in and out throughout the song. So these filter sweeps is a pretty popular transition effect inside of the synthwave genre, and is often used in the intro and pre-choruses, just as we did here. And next up, I just want to go over a few of the effects in the track. Now, there really aren't too many in this project, and generally there aren't too many in the synthwave genre, but the few that are in there are extremely important, including these uplifters and downlifters. So at the very beginning of the track during our initial filter sweep, we also add this additional uplifter, and this is just a white noise uplifter that we found in a cymatic sample pack. So let's hear what that sounds like. Very cool, and then let's hear the downlifter after that. Alright, sounds very nice. Now these uplifters and downlifters become extremely important in the song's transition moments. These become audible indicators letting the audience know what's coming next. So for example, when you're using an uplifter, you are slowly building more tension. And that lets the audience know that we're getting to the end of this section or the end of this phrase, and that something else is coming. And the downlifter is used to relieve or release the tension that was built up with the uplifter. Using this tension and release process, creatively adjusting how the energy flows is a big part of music production. You need to always be informing the listener with these audible cues, letting the listener know where they are in the song and if something is coming next. So where we're actually using these uplifters and downlifters right now is in the intro of the song and in the pre-choruses. And if this song was actually finished, we would also likely use it in the outro as well. And next up, let's take a quick look at our lead melody. Now for our lead, we are using the TAL-U-NO-LX synth, which is a fantastic synth for using on 80s type sounds, as it does emulate all those popular 80s synthesizers. And for our preset, we are using the BRS Brass 1 FMR, with a little bit of portamento in here as well. Now we are doing something a little interesting here with our lead. You can see we have 3 different versions of the exact same MIDI here, technically 4 here at the bottom, but 3 using the TAL synth. And the reason why I'm doing this is to fill out the stereo spectrum a little bit more to make this lead sound much bigger. So basically what we did here is we have a high, mid, and low. So we have our first synth here playing the high notes, which is an octave above the middle, which is an octave above the low. So you can hear all 3 real quick right now. Now, in addition to these each playing a different octave, I also have the processing set up so that we are cutting out various highs and lows as well. So now, all 3 together will sound like this. So you can definitely tell that the sound is definitely much bigger, much wider, much more full than if we just used one single instrument. And for your leads in your synthwave songs, you typically do want to stick with something that sounds like this, something similar to a brass or a bell-like sound. And of course, ideally coming from a synth or an emulation of a synth that was created in the 80s. Now we do have one final sound down here at the very bottom, using the exact same MIDI as our main lead sound here. And this was just to fill out the sound even a little bit more. It definitely adds a little bit more lushness to the overall sound. So by itself, let's hear what it sounds like. So it does sound kind of trippy by itself, but that 80s type of warble, that tape-like warble sound, is definitely something that adds a little bit of extra character to that lead sound. And so now let's hear what the lead sounds like with all 4 of those sounds. Alright, and that pretty much covers all the main sounds in this track. Now, normally for each release of our new sample packs, I do a how to use video. giving you a quick walkthrough of the pack. But this time I want to sort of combine the how to make a synthwave track video and how to use our synthwave pack video into one. So I just wanted to quickly and briefly go through the pack with you guys so you can see what you're getting. Now again, the pack is 100% completely free and comes with over 150 sounds. And we have those nice and organized into the folders here. So for all of your iOS apps, to get our sounds in those apps, you simply navigate to the iOS folder. And here we will have presets for pretty much every major app that you can think of, at least 13 apps, including all the major DAWs such as Cubasis, Beatmaker 3, and Nano Studio 2. Now if we go back here, we can see that we also have a main wave folder here. This is where all the sounds will actually live, including all the drums, melodies, and so forth. So if we tap on that, you can see that we organize everything into bass loops, bass one-shots, drum kits, drum loops, drum one-shots, FX, guitar loops, melody loops, and synth one-shots. So very nice and clearly labeled. And in addition to the WAV files, we even give you the MIDI files as well, including the MIDI for all of our bass loops and synth loops. Now let's go ahead and demo just a couple of these sounds inside of the WAV folder. Let's start out with a bass loop first, since synthwave is very much known for its bass sounds. So let's listen to the wet version here of loop number 7. Alright, very cool. That is processed amazingly, as you can hear, with the sidechain already built in, ready to rock. Now let's check out another sound here. Let's do one of our guitar loops, and we'll play one of the wet sounds there. Alright, very cool. So you definitely can hear that we hired a professional guitarist there to really nail and capture that 80s sound. And now let's just listen to one of our drum loops real quick. Very, of course, classic 80s sounding there, beautiful. And of course, we give you a README with instructions on how to install all of these presets to your iOS device. Alright, and that is pretty much it for the pack, a completely free and awesome pack that you can go download right now at MobileMusicPro.com. Alright, and now it's time again for our final thoughts. And if you are still rocking with us, then we can't thank you enough for being here. And we especially can't thank the folks enough that are here every Wednesday and Friday watching our videos. And of course, apologies again for this video being a little bit late this week. I definitely had to put some extra work into building this synthwave song. And I still didn't even get the whole thing finished, but definitely trying my best. And I just quickly wanted to offer my same disclaimer that I always do in these types of videos, which is that if you do plan on producing music in this genre, please just be aware that this was just an introductory video and that there are far more qualified and better producers out there making more advanced videos in this genre. But we are still going to be releasing these types of videos for the foreseeable future because there just are so many genres out there, and we definitely want our audience to be as prepared as possible. And of course, going through all these genres definitely keeps the content nice and fresh here at Mobile Music Pro. But if you do find these videos helpful, definitely make sure to smash the likes so that YouTube can recommend us to a bunch more people. And as we mentioned at the top of the video, we are hosting a brand new contest to celebrate the release of our latest Synthwave sample pack. All you have to do is create an original production using as many sounds from the new sample pack as you can. The contest will be going from May 5th all the way through May 19th, so definitely get your submissions in as soon as possible. And just like our previous contests, we are featuring 4 prizes, which means there can be up to 4 winners. So we definitely, of course, wish everybody the very best of luck. For all the rules, prizes, and further details on how to enter, definitely visit our website at MobileMusicPro.com/contest. And of course, we always have a ton more content coming down the pipe, folks, so if you definitely want to keep up with everything that we're doing here at the channel, everything from giveaways to contests to sample packs and more, go ahead and head over to our website at MobileMusicPro.com and sign up for our free mailing list. And so, until next time, everybody, keep talking music, and we'll see you later.